What's a courtroom moment that left everyone speechless? This is a second-hand account from my mom, but it's a pretty good story. It's even better when she tells it herself. So my mom is from New York, but has been living in Toronto for like 30 years now and has full citizenship. However, she retains that classic pushy New Yorker side of herself. So one day she was called for jury duty, so she headed down there to sit around all day. She was finally called to go to another room, but a sign directed her the wrong way. She walked back and turned the sign around so that nobody else would get confused. One of the local clerks saw this and put the sign back, saying that my mom didn't have the necessary authority to move it. My mom asked the clerk if they could move it, and they replied that they couldn't either. Not wanting to leave a clearly wrong sign sitting around and angering people, my mom took it to the next level up. That guy still couldn't authorize moving the sign, and my mom flipped out at him, essentially saying, "It's a crappy sign, that's wrong, just point it the other way." Still, no luck, so she went to see his manager. Once there, it was the same situation. He couldn't move the sign and wouldn't listen to reason. My mom continued to go up the chain, which, according to her, took several hours that she was supposed to spend waiting for jury selection with a good book. Eventually, she reached the person in charge. Apparently, he was the only one there with any intelligence because he essentially said, "Just turn the dang sign around, lady." So she was escorted by top management to the location of the sign where she turned it to face the proper direction so nobody else would be misled by bureaucratic, nonsensical signs put up by schmucks. Story 2. Some years ago, my friend, let's call him Dan, was called in for jury duty. Dan is a big guy with a booming voice, but a total teddy bear. During the jury questioning phase, the defense attorney gave the prospective jurors the prosecution's witness list and asked if they knew anyone on it. Dan raised his hand, pointed to a name, and said, "Yeah, I knew this guy. He used to be a coworker of my dad." The defense attorney, who was apparently big into grandstanding, launched into a speech about conflicts of interest and how they destroy the foundations of the judicial system. Dan stood up, held both arms out, and yelled, "Hold on, does it matter that this guy passed away 3 weeks ago?" Apparently, the judge had to recess the court because everyone was laughing too hard. It turns out the prosecution was so fixated on their witness list that they hadn't even realized their key witness had passed away. What a bunch of schmucks. Story 3. My dad was once called for jury duty and there was a little old lady going through voidoir with him. She must have been as close to deaf as possible because the conversation between her and the lawyers went like this. Lawyer, do you have any experience with X? Lady, what? Lawyer, louder. Do you have any experience with X? Lady, I can't hear you. Lawyer, screaming now, do you have any experience with X? Lady, well, you don't have to shout. What was the question? After a couple of rounds of this, the lawyers moved on. The lady must have really had a fixation on being on the jury because after about 3 other people were asked questions, she suddenly started screaming, "I'm a good Christian woman. How dare you ignore me because I'm black?" She made the jury. My dad did not. That was the day he decided the justice system was bunk and run by schmucks. Story 4. This isn't really a funny story, but more of a look at what happened when I was selected for jury duty. I was selected a couple of years ago and was one of the younger people on the jury. After hearing the case, we all went back into the room assigned to us and everyone was ready to write the guy off as guilty. We decided we would do a show of hands vote. It was 11-1, guilty. I was the one. I cannot explain to you how angry some people got. I just wasn't ready to call someone guilty when A, the lawyer did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty, and B, we had barely even discussed the case. One guy told me, "Prove to me he's innocent," and I got very annoyed. I said, "It's not my job to prove he's innocent, it's the lawyer's job to prove he's guilty, which he did not do. So you have to convince me he's guilty, not the other way around." I ended up getting it to 8-4 not guilty by the end of the first day, which was insane considering we started at 11-1 guilty. When they kicked us out for the day, one of the other juries pulled me aside and told me how much he respected me for standing up to some of the bullies in the room. The next day, I lost all the ground I had gained. It was an extremely frustrating experience. You hear incredibly ignorant things from schmucks like, "Just look at him, he did it," because the guy had kind of a creepy look to him. The case involved a kid and one person said, "You don't have kids, you don't understand," which is basically just admitting his own bias. Story 5. I'm not a big fan of jury duty after actually having to serve on one. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm glad I did because we actually helped a guy avoid being charged due to crappy police work and a terrible friend who got him thrown in jail, causing him to lose his business. It was a substance case. The jury selection was frustrating. I'd asked the judge to be let go because I was a full-time student working full-time to support myself. However, I was passed over for selection in favor of, ironically, while wearing my "More Money, More Problems" graphic t-shirt, people who were excused, a dude who lived in Chicago with important business, and a non-refundable plane ticket, a guy who said he was for the legalization of pot, and a housewife who didn't want to leave her children with a babysitter. During the trial, it was obvious these cops messed up royally. We could have given a not guilty verdict on the first day, but we had two people who thought he was guilty. We decided to come back the next day to discuss it. The next day was a nightmare. One of the two holdouts decided overnight that he was innocent after reviewing the evidence in his head. However, there was one woman, the memory still haunts me. She said she believed in her heart that he was guilty and that there was no way the cops had messed up. I asked her what evidence showed he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and she couldn't tell me. We went through two foremen who tried to convince her to change her vote. This went on for 2 full days, 16 hours of deliberation. Finally, on Thursday, an old man who looked like the Templar priest from Kingdom of Heaven said, "We need younger people to step in and help move things forward." He looked straight at me and said, "You're now the foreman." All the housewives were in agreement. I was done with that room and done with this woman who had gone on to say she could wait us all out because she had nothing to do at home. Also, she kept leaving the deliberation room to talk to a secretary, which should have disqualified her immediately. I finally said, "We are going to vote one more time. If it's not unanimous, I'm going to the judge and telling him we can't come to an agreement." She bolted out of the room crying. The bailiff came in to ask what was wrong. I explained the situation and he told the judge. I then had to talk to the judge and explain that she didn't take notes, didn't understand the rules of being a juror, and should have been excused for talking to the secretary. The judge replied, "Okay, well, we are bringing in an alternate juror now. You can all take an extended lunch break." The alternate juror sat down and said, "I was the wife of a police officer for 8 years. Those guys messed up royally and that guy is innocent. Let's vote." We voted and were out of the building 30 minutes later. Story 6. I've been called to jury a few times, but this was my first and only time making it into a courtroom. I should note, I'm white and live in a predominantly black area. The defendant was a young black male there for some sort of auto theft-related crime. I'm in my late 20s and was dressed in business casual. The judge went through the first set of general questions to remove potential jurors, none of which applied to me. Next, the defense and prosecutor got to strike a certain number of jurors from those who were left. Everyone was in a line, and as each juror went to the front, if either side wanted to strike, they could. So I got to the front of the line, and the defendant, not the defense attorney, took one look at me and said, "Strike." I guess he thought I'd find him guilty. Story 7. Ford was being sued by a man who rolled his Explorer into a ditch. He claimed that had the roof been stronger, his wife would not have passed away. The really short version is, if the vehicle had been built like a tank and she had been wearing a 5-point harness, maybe she would have lived. But cars can't all be tanks. I fought tooth and nail with the other jurors. I may have even come across the table at another guy, not one of my proudest moments, because while they had shown the car could have been built better, like a Volvo at the time, and the roof would have crushed less, they had not proven that it would have been enough to make a difference for the woman. Would 4 inches less of a crush have saved her? Would it actually have crushed 4 inches less, more, less? Those questions were not answered definitively by anyone. The schmucks on the jury wanted to give the guy money simply because Ford can afford it. I fought them with all the logic I could throw at them and single-handedly turned the jury on question 4 of our judgment worksheet. Later, I ran into the guy I knew who had been bumped off the jury, which allowed me on. He would have been the foreman if they hadn't kicked him. He asked about the case and I explained the details and our verdict. He said, "Oh, come on, if I'd been there, I would have made everyone give the family something. Ford can afford it." I've always felt like my presence in that court made the difference between a proper, honest verdict and a crappy witch hunt against a big company. Story 8. I served on a jury once with the most inane older woman sitting next to me the whole time. She was seriously terrible. She spent most of the trial writing emails on her iPad, doing crossword puzzles, or sleeping. When she wasn't doing any of that, she was interrupting the testimony to ask people to speak up, asking clarifying questions, making side comments to other jurors, or telling the attorneys and even the judge that she thought they weren't supposed to do something based on her misunderstanding of the pretrial instructions. At one point, she said to the judge, "I thought we weren't supposed to consider such and such testimony." The judge replied, "If something comes up and I don't want you to consider it, I'll tell you. No, shut the hell up." The best part was that once we got into deliberation, she had the audacity to volunteer herself as the foreperson. Every single one of us gave her the biggest eye ever until finally one woman managed to break through her flabbergastedness to say, "I think I'd prefer it if you weren't our foreperson." We immediately elected that second woman as our foreperson instead. The woman also held up our deliberations with rambling anecdotes that had no relevance and a consistent misunderstanding of the legal statutes we were debating. I still have no idea how she made it onto that jury, but she was genuinely trying to do a good job when she felt like paying attention. At least she wasn't a crazy racist or anything. Story 9. I was on a case where one of the jurors lied about knowing the defendant and people associated with him. It was a second-degree termination case, and he initially voted not guilty because he couldn't bear to see another black man victimized by the system. After we all explained that we weren't there to make a statement but rather to weigh the facts and evidence, he relented and agreed to a guilty verdict. Then he found out we might each individually have to state that we agreed with the verdict in the courtroom after the foreman read it. He freaked out but went into the courtroom anyway. Sure enough, after the verdict was read and the defense attorney requested the jurors be polled, it finally came around to him. Do you agree with the verdict? Nope. Mistrial. There was a lot of screaming at him from the other jurors, and he definitely got a talking to from the judge. Story 10. My I didn't get selected for jury duty story went as such. Prosecutor, do any of you know what the differences are between guilty, not guilty, and innocent? I raised my hand. Prosecutor, go ahead. Me, guilty is someone we find committed the crime, not guilty means there was not enough evidence to convict, and innocent means that the person in question did not commit the crime they are being charged with. Another juror, wrong, not guilty, and innocent are the same thing. I was told that my services were not required and they kept the other guy. I still received my $10 for the day, although that didn't even cover the parking I paid for 2 blocks away from the courthouse. Story 11. My aunt was recently on a jury for a 2-week trial. One of the questions they asked before selecting the jury was, and I'm paraphrasing from memory, can you make a judgment based on the evidence and can you apply the law to the case based on that evidence? Obviously, the prospective jurors had to answer yes to that question to make the cut. Then after 2 weeks of trial, the jury went to deliberate. Right off the bat, 2 different people said pretty much the same thing. Only God can judge. It's not up to me to judge people for their crimes. So, the son of a witch who ended his own kid got off because 2 people didn't have the balls to deliver a verdict that would possibly lead to the penalty. And that's just messed up. On a side note, I've always wanted to be selected for jury duty, but I never have been, even after 17 years of being a registered voter. Story 12. I've been called to jury duty twice. The second case started jury selection, but the lawyers plea bargained before selections were made. It was a termination case. The judge is giving us info about the case, and someone in back yells out, I don't believe in the penalty. I assume to get themselves out of serving. She yells back, doesn't matter, not a penalty case, you aren't going anywhere. The first case was pretty interesting. It lasted about 3 weeks. I got selected pretty easily. I filled out a standard questionnaire. They asked me one question, what do you do for a living and who do you work for? I told them I made maps for the US government. They said, okay, thanks. Working for the government, we get our full pay while we're on jury duty, so they're happy to have us. I guess they figure we all want the change in scenery and we're getting paid. Story 13. I was summoned for jury duty in 2008 at the tender age of 20. There were about 16 of us waiting in a tiny, cramped room for the case to begin, and I was standing behind an older gentleman wearing a navy blue turtleneck. I had a bit of a cold as it was the middle of February, and I felt a booger at the edge of my nostril. I looked around, no tissues. Damn. I figured, well, I'll just pick it and flick it, no one's looking anyway. So there I am, happily mining for gold and satisfied with the sight of my treasure, I released it toward the floor. My trajectory was off though, and it went forward, landing on the back of the man in front of me. No one noticed, but crap, what was I supposed to do? I froze, but by then it was too late to do anything. We were headed to the courtroom. I followed closely behind him so nobody would see the booger on his back, bright green with a long tail like a comet soaring through the cosmos against that navy blue turtleneck. Fast forward a few hours later, we were on recess for lunch and I'd long forgotten about the ornament I'd left on this man's back until one of the other jurors noticed it. Hey, you've got something on your back. Let me get that for you, she said. I looked up just in time to see this woman scratching away at the dried snot I'd left on the poor man's back. Story 14. I'm a little late to the game, but this is my go-to jury duty story. It was my first time doing jury duty. I was interested in the whole process, but having never done it before, I was a little nervous about the whole process. I brought some music and a book and just prepared for a long day. As I walked in, I had no idea how awesome my day was about to become. I came into the waiting room before we went to the courtroom. There's about 100 people that just look miserable, quiet, swollen, and miserable. As I'm looking around the room for a seat, I suddenly see a familiar face. It was my uncle. I proceed over and say hi. Turns out we're in the same jury pool. Pretty much guarantees one of us won't be on the jury. Although it's not technically illegal to have family members serve together, I hear it's not something the lawyers like to see. Anyway, my uncle is loving the whole thing. He's pretty much taking this as a vacation day. Everyone else in the room looks to be hating life, and he looked as content as if he was sipping Mai Tais in Cabo, so we hang out, joke around, and have a good time. Finally, we get called into the jury. My uncle is one of the first 12 called up. He looks kind of nervous, but he goes up without hesitation. I must mention that at no point has he talked about trying to get out of jury duty. I don't think he was looking forward to it, but he clearly didn't mind doing it. Anyway, the judge explains that this case is about a young girl being essayed by her stepdad with a violent gang-related history. It's an awful case to sit through. The girl is probably going to have to testify. I wasn't opposed to serving either until I found out the nature of the case. It sounded awful. Anyway, the lawyers get to ask their questions. They're going one by one till they get to my uncle. At my uncle, the defense lawyer asks a very reasonable question. Do you believe children lie? I actually knew my uncle's response to this. He calmly stated, no, I could never imagine my kids lying to me at that age. It's very difficult for me to believe that young children will lie. Now, I've always felt this was a bit sappy. I love my cousins, but I know they weren't as honest as they could have been. But my uncle believed it through and through. The defense lawyer was undeterred. Clearly, she was actually expecting this response. She wanted to prep everyone in the room for what her eventual argument would be. She proceeded to paint a scene. All right, let's imagine for a second that there is a man standing outside the courtroom. He tells a young child that something is true, which is not true. He tells them that this thing that is untrue is the truth. So the child comes to believe that this thing is true, although it's not true. Now the child comes into the room and testifies. They sit there and tell you what they believe to be true, but it's not the truth. It's just what the man outside the courtroom said was true. Do you believe a child could have that happen to them? This lady could have not used the word true more often without it simply being a joke, but it was easy enough to understand what she was going to argue eventually. An adult had told the girl she was mistreated and convinced the little girl she was mistreated and needed to testify. Although it would be untrue, the girl would be testifying in good conscience, not lying. My uncle just sort of stared at her for a few seconds considering this possibility, and I was truly curious to see what his answer would be. Finally, after a short time of contemplation, he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. The defense lawyer paused and described the whole thing again. Again, he responded, and I believe this was his honest response. What? At this point, everyone in the room is laughing. Even the judge has a grin. The lawyer seemed flustered, not even kind of able to break through the shell of my uncle's confusion. The lawyer calls a sidebar. Both lawyers walk up to the judge. She's clearly asking the judge to hold my uncle in contempt or at the very least dismiss him on grounds of not being fit for jury duty. At this point, the judge laughs aloud and says, nope, he stays. They have to go through the rest of the questioning before the lawyers can dismiss jurors without reason. The prosecutor sat with her assistant for 5 minutes strategizing before excusing 2 jurors. When the defense lawyer got a chance, she jumped up and excused my uncle. The judge chuckled again. Later that evening, I swung by his house to hang out with my cousins and recap the events of the day. I walked in and my uncle's only response was, I still have no idea what she was trying to get at. Alright, so if you're enjoying the video too, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 15. The first time I got called to jury duty was in my mid-30s. This woman was charged with intoxicated driving. It was a weird case. Every time the prosecution would start an argument, the defense would object, the judge would call them up to the bench. They'd confer for a few minutes and decide that the issue couldn't be discussed in a few minutes, so the jury was asked to leave the courtroom and wait in the hall. We'd wait out there for a half hour to an hour and get called back in, and the prosecutor would start a new argument. This happened 3 times. The prosecution had to rest his case without ever really having made one, yet somehow, miraculously, 3 of the 6 members of the jury decided she was guilty, because they just felt like she was. I felt like she was too, but that's not how it works. The 6 of us deliberated for an hour, but no one was willing to move from their original positions. I even got them to agree that the prosecution didn't make his case, but for some reason, these 3 people felt happy to convict despite that. I find that horribly disturbing. If you can't make a case, then you don't get to convict. Story 16. It was my first jury duty, and I didn't want to get out of it. Seemed like it could be fun, so I answered honestly. It was a guy charged with harming a peace officer. The man claimed that this was a lie and was fighting it. The defense hated me because I have 2 family members who are police officers and asked me questions for a very long time. They asked what they told me about their work and all that. I just told them they didn't tell me things as gossip, but more like life lessons, and the lawyer asked for an example. And I said, well, they told me if you ride a motorcycle without a helmet, your brains will get cleaned up with a cup. He laughed and I guess decided I was okay because I was put through. It took a long time to get all the jurors and I was in the first group to go up, so it was interesting to see the whole thing through. They had to dismiss a lot of screw the police type of people. Selection itself took like 2 days. The cop testified that the guy lunged headfirst at him. He flipped on the shoulders of the defendant and was whipped off with a helicopter-like motion. This was fishy to all of us because of the size of the defendant and the size of the officer. Then they went through a long list of officers who saw the whole thing, all with drastically different stories, and a lot of them were lies. If you match the stories with the pictures and measurements of the tank it took place in, there was just no way. Allegedly, the officer landed on his knee, causing damage that would never heal, but pictures had just redness that was equivalent to kneeling en masse. Meanwhile, the defendant had bruises and taser marks everywhere. Other men in the tank testified to police brutality against the defendant. Deliberation was pretty ridiculous because it was about 50-50, but the people who thought he was guilty thought so because in their minds he was guilty no matter what. The other jurors spent 2 days trying to reason with him. I just sat quietly reading paperwork, and I think that's what prompted the guy to get nasty with me. I felt the defendant was innocent, but I was trying to find a way to prove it to the 50% who thought he was guilty, and then I found it. The officer who said he was injured filed and was denied disability for a knee injury 1 year before this all happened. I showed this to the other jurors and we took a vote again, 100% not guilty. When we went out and read the verdict, the judge was stunned. She was always clearly on the prosecution side and made us tell her one by one. Afterwards, I asked the defendant if he really did hit the cop and he said no. I said, no BS, I mean, they can't charge you again and I just want to know if I made the right choice. And he said, no BS, I never touched him. The defendant was a really nice guy and who was previously doing really well at university, so hopefully he was able to go back to school. All in all, I thought it was a cool experience. Story 17. I sat on a jury for a civil case once. It was a lawsuit over a person injured when some safety equipment malfunctioned. The company that produced the safety equipment switched their manufacturing from China to Thailand, and when they did, they didn't bother to update their required third-party safety certificates. They claimed they had, but they could never produce the actual cert or get anyone to testify that they had done the certification. Not to mention that the product completely failed to do its job when required. So we sit down to deliberate and the jury foreman wants to take a quick poll to make sure we're not unanimous in our thinking. We go around the room and myself and another woman are the lone guilty votes. I'm surprised, but that's okay. I have sound logic and facts on my side. The woman that also voted guilty starts looking nervous and she begins scanning the room. Well, I mean, if everyone else thinks not guilty, then I'm changing my decision. I don't want to sit here any longer than I have to. So there you go. Someone was permanently disfigured by a billion-dollar corporation that was trying to save a few bucks by outsourcing their production from China to Thailand and didn't ensure that their safety product was in fact safe. But this switch has places to be that day, so screw this poor dude with a mangled face. Awesome. Never put your life in the hands of a jury, ever. Oh, and during deliberations, I asked for the reasoning behind each person's not guilty verdict. Here were some of the better ones. But I really like this company. I didn't like the injured person's lawyer. He seems swarmy. I don't know. I think maybe they just want money. Story 18. Don't forget many people make such outrageously disqualifying statements because they want out of jury duty. My mother, on the other hand, was thrilled to be requested for jury duty for a very high-profile criminal case involving organized crime. They asked her some routine questions and were pretty much about to accept her as a member of the jury when she raised her hand to speak. She proudly stands up and says, "Your Honor, thank you so much. This is such an incredible opportunity for me. These criminals are a true menace to society and I couldn't be more pleased they will finally get what they deserve and get sent away for a very long time." Dismissed. Story 19. My mother worked in the courts. She used to tell stories. Basically, on any jury, you can expect to get at least one idiot. She used to say requiring a unanimous verdict was insane. Once, a juror refused to convict because she insisted the man was too attractive to be guilty. Another time, the juror sent a letter claiming she was forced by the other jurors. The letter was filled with misspellings and written at a second-grade level. Quite frequently, jurors will drag out deliberations as long as possible so they can keep collecting the minimum wage salary offered by the state. Story 20. I'm certain this will get buried. Always wanted to say that. I'm 24 and did my first jury duty 2 years ago. I got picked in the first round and had to sit in the courtroom. So basically, the lawyers are asking tons of questions and people are supposed to raise or not raise their hands according to their response. They would also occasionally ask follow-up questions. None of the questions applied to me until they came to the last question. The best part is one of the lawyers picked up on my responses, or lack thereof. I made a comment about me being a quiet one, in jest, mind you. Everyone laughed. So they come to the last question. Do you feel grass should be legal? Living in South Texas, I can tell you my heart skipped a beat. I had to do the right thing and stand by my convictions. Immediately after the question is asked, my hand shoots up. I didn't even think about it. I figured someone else would agree, but out of 50 jurors, I was the only one in that room with his hand up. They then asked a follow-up question of why. I, of course, said it's never harmed or ended anyone and we should be allowed to decide what goes into our own bodies. Sweet and to the point. I knew I wouldn't get picked, which was fine with me. From the questions being asked, I'm pretty sure it was a child custody case. The father has money, owns a construction business, but the mother was attempting to use grass against him to gain custody. Interesting first experience in the justice system. Story 21. With all these stories, I guess I'll share mine. I'd like to start by saying serving on a jury is a civic duty, and I really hate it when people try to cheat their way out of it. A few years ago, I was selected to be on jury for a trial about a guy who was giving substances and alcohol to his high school daughter and her friends. He was being charged with intimate conduct with one of his friends. Doing the voir dire, there were a few other college-age students who all asked to be excused so they didn't have to risk missing school. The judge denied them, but I noticed that every girl who mentioned they were in college was then excused. There was a girl who ended up on the jury who was college age but not currently in college, so the lawyers didn't know her age. But the defense lawyers, I reckon they didn't want girls close in age judging essentially their peers. Also, I noticed all the mothers were kept on, which was good for defense because they were the only ones who wanted to convict him regardless of evidence. The final random fact was that the girl sitting next to me ended up being someone from my high school. Talk about a small world. Story 22. My jury duty was quite interesting. In England, none of my fellow jurors were anything other than I expected, just normal people. This one case though, there are stupid criminals. Then there was this guy. Caught burgling a house via DNA evidence, left a cigarette butt at the scene. Looked like a total scumbag and it was obvious without being said he was in the police database. He denied everything, of course. We found him guilty only to find out after, as the judge told us, he had burglared several other houses on the street, which he admitted to, several lockups in the area, and had a list of crimes as long as your arm against him. He'd spent 17 of the last 21 years in prison, and when busted, over 90,000 pounds worth of stolen equipment was found in his home. Repeat offenders, why even bother? Some people refuse to change. Story 23. I was in the selection pool for a medical malpractice case. A girl was born with a dislocated hip, but the doctor didn't notice. The doctor found it shortly after, popped the joint back together, and the girl was just fine. Now it's several years later, and the mother is suing the doctor for malpractice, and while they're doing their voir dire, the little girl is running around the courtroom, crawling under tables, playing with toys, and generally having a great time. When lunchtime came, I walked up to the mother's attorney and told him that the girl has all the right number of fingers and toes, is developing just fine, and had no ill effects from the delayed diagnosis, and that the mother should thank whatever deity she believes in for having a perfect little girl and be ashamed for filing that suit, and that if I was on the jury, I would not give her a dime and that the court should fine her for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. For some reason, he didn't like that and I was dismissed. Now that I think about it, I should have kept my mouth shut and been selected and given the doctor the fair trial he deserves. Story 24. People say things like that to get out of jury duty. Who wants to do it? Especially people who have their own businesses, landscaping, that are stuck doing jury duty and not making money. I had a friend who did jury duty. He said when he went in, they had to briefly overview the case. If people knew the individual or had any connection to the case, they were not allowed to be a juror since they might be biased. So they started going over the case, and the defendant was a black male. He said the woman next to him that he was talking to told him that she doesn't want to do jury duty and that she wants to get out of it. She told him that she is going to tell the judge that she is racist. He just laughed as if she was joking. About 5 minutes later, he said she raised her hand and said, "I should be excluded from jury duty. I hate black people and I think they are a drain on society and all should be in jail." He said the judge looked at her, shocked about how blunt she was, then he dismissed her. Story 25. My friend was called for jury duty. He was asked a few questions, but they decided to dismiss him. School, work, obligations, I think. Anyways, I decided to text him, not knowing he's still there and also figuring his phone would be on silent. It wasn't. Just as he was leaving the witness stand where he was being interviewed, his phone blew up with his ringtone for me, the Joker's maniacal laugh. He says he froze right there, not knowing what to do. All I can imagine is the judge telling him he's free to go, after what I assume is a BS excuse for why he can't attend, followed by crazy laughter. So he just looks at the judge with his, "Oh, I'm so sorry" look. The judge told him something about if he doesn't want to be held in contempt to put the phone on silent. They weren't happy about it. He thanked them and left. Story 26. I was interning for a prosecutor's office and helping with a felony trial, second-degree trafficking. After some of the initial questions finding potential conflicts with members of the jury, one man raises his hand when he asked if anyone knows the defendant. Juror, "Yes, I know him." The prosecutor thought for a moment, considering a potential problem, and then asked, "How do you know him?" Juror, "I know him from another case." Prosecutor, "Can we speak with you with the judge for a moment, sir?" They all came up to the bench and this guy tells how he was an actual victim of one of the defendant's earlier crimes. He was robbed at gunpoint. The victim then participated in the prosecution of the defendant for that crime and he went to jail for that crime. He was excused immediately as it was too harsh to make him stay for hours in the same room with his assailant. Never thought I would be seeing anything like that, just what are the odds? Story 27. I was called into jury duty a few months ago and got put on a case where a mother was accused of grand theft, ripping off some kind of fundraiser event or something. I have a ton of projects going on with work where I just started a few months prior to my being called up. and it was entirely inconvenient for me to serve, but I am not the kind of person that makes a butt out of myself for convenience. I merely do it entirely by accident. So I show up to jury duty, and I'm in a room of people that seem much more inconvenienced than I. Lucky me, I am called for this case and participate in the voir dire. They are asking the jury all kinds of questions, involvement in prior crimes, theft, fundraising, etc. Honesty being my best policy, I was prompted by the prosecution to respond if I have any experience in fundraising. I responded that I did, and that I work for the annual Fraternal Order of Police Reverse Raffle, and that I work with the money and balance the books. The defense turned pale. I had to proceed saying that the majority of males in my family are law enforcement officers, and that I am actively involved in the FOP. The prosecution rests, and now the defense attorneys begin questioning my practices and if I ever experience any problems with the books, trying to make it sound possible that mistakes can be made during fundraising events. I explained that as long as the books were maintained and done correctly, that it is nearly impossible to make any kind of errors. I was dismissed from the jury. Story 28. Last September, I was called for jury duty. I got into the selection pool expecting to be one of the first ones eliminated. I was 19 years old at the time, the youngest person in the entire courtroom by 6 years. I almost made it onto the jury. It was a case involving 2 women accused of assisting an extremist group, and what upset the National Security Panel was that when they asked whether I'd feel nervous about a Muslim passenger boarding a plane with carry-on luggage, I was the only person who said no. My whole response was, that seems illogical to me. If I became nervous every time I boarded a plane with someone simply because of their religion, that would be as illogical as refusing to eat home-cooked meals because a tiny number of people have used food to harm others. Some people do horrible things, but that doesn't mean that everyone does. After that, and the fact that when asked, I divulged that my friend had top-secret clearance because he was a Persian Dari airborne linguist in the military, national security wanted me out of there, I was the third-to-last person eliminated from the pool. Story 29. Well, I can say that I have had one quite awesome jury duty experience. I almost wish I could do it again just to watch it all happen again. I was sitting in on an accident case, and the lady was claiming lasting damage after an auto accident. The other lawyer representing the insurance company was Mr. Drake. The lady's lawyer was very quiet and barely spoke at all, but Mr. Drake was very loud and flamboyant. He walked and gestured with his hands. It was also dramatic. But the way he questioned the lady was just like something out of Matlock. He got her to admit one simple fact at the beginning, then through his questioning led her full circle around to totally contradict her original statement of fact. It was simply an amazing experience, and I was in complete awe. It was like watching a law show on television. Funny, too, I have just come up for selection again. Due to this one experience, I am actually looking forward to going, even though I know the odds of that happening again are highly unlikely. Story 30. Another time in the jury box during voir dire, the prosecuting attorney asked how we would tell if a witness was lying. This federal agent they allowed to stay for the moment said he had training that would help him detect if a person was lying or not. The prosecutor asked me, and I said something like, I will take into account everything that's been said up to that point and do my best. You really can't tell cold if someone you don't know is lying to you. The prosecutor said, well, that's not what the federal agent back there said. He said he could. I said, well, peer-reviewed published research shows that the only people who could tell if a stranger is lying is better than blind luck is a Secret Service agent. So with all due respect to my fellow potential juror, he's just wrong. It was like I told a yo mama joke to a packed auditorium in high school. The entire jury pool just went, ooh. The prosecutor just sat there, stunned. He said, really? I said, yeah, I'll fax your office a copy of the journal article if you want. He said, yeah, actually, I'd like that. And suddenly he sort of snapped back to reality, like he just realized we were actually in a courtroom during voir dire, and the defense attorney told me to leave. Another time, the prosecutor related an analogy to us and asked what we thought. I told him, I see the comparison you're trying to make, and I agree, but your analogy just doesn't hold water. And again, shown the door. Story 31. I live in Baltimore, and getting called for jury duty is something that happens every day to up to 1,000 people. The first time I got called, after waiting for several hours, they brought about 200 of us into a large courtroom. They said the attorneys had provided a list of questions and the judge would read them aloud. If any applied to us, we would stand up and they would record our number. Most of the questions were pretty narrow. Do any of you know the accused? Do any of you know the victim? Do any of you know any of the counsel? Then he got to one question. Have any of you or any family or loved ones or anyone close to you been touched by crime? This means committed a crime, been accused of a crime, or had any crime happen to you. Now, this is Baltimore. 95% of the people there had lived their entire lives. Everyone has known someone who had their car broken into, if not something more serious, at the very least. Almost everyone immediately stood up. That was the only thing I stood up for, and my car had been broken into once and had a girlfriend who had a car broken into. and I eventually was dismissed. So now I'm left wondering, how could there have been enough people who did not stand up to pick a complete jury? And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.